I would like to enhance my presentation on Japan with the knowledge I have acquired at the university. This involves the political theories of international relations, which I have become familiar with in the course Introduction to International Relations. I plan to apply these theories to Japan in its war efforts leading up to and during World War II to explain and contextualize the events. The first of the four theories is called realism. Japan's entry into World War II, when examined through the lens of realism in international relations, is reflective of the period's profound power imbalances and the aggressive pursuit of state security and autonomy within an anarchic international system. Realism posits that in an anarchic international system where there is no overarching authority to regulate state actions, existential uncertainty dominates. Each state is primarily concerned with its own survival and autonomy, making the pursuit of security its ultimate goal. All other objectives, whether economically, ideologically, or otherwise, are subordinate to this overarching need for security. In the lead up to World War II, Japan faced a significant power imbalance. The Western powers, most notably the United States, the United Kingdom, and colonial European nations, dominated global affairs, while Japan's ambitions to be recognized as a comparable power were not satisfied. This created a sense of insecurity and drove Japan to pursue a path of military expansion to ensure its security and autonomy. Japan perceived military power as the currency of the international system. In an effort to alter the power distribution that was skewed against it, Japan sought to acquire resources and territory, viewing colonial expansion as a means to economic self sufficiency and a buffer against external threats. This was evident in Japan's earlier incursions into Manchuria and later into China. Realism also acknowledges that military might is relative. The perceived decline of European powers during the interwar period and their preoccupation with security concerns on the European continent created a perceived opportunity for Japan to assert itself in East Asia. Japan aimed to exploit this first strike advantage through preventive warfare, believing that securing resources and strategic territories would ensure its long-term survival and prevent other states from becoming too strong. Moreover, the likelihood of war, according to realism, depends on two variable factors: power distribution and technology. At the time, the world was multipolar, with several great powers competing for influence. Japan, seeing itself as a rising power, constrained by the existing multipolar order, sought to shift the balance of power in its favor. Technological advancements in military capabilities also play a crucial role in realist theory. Offensive technologies may encourage states to engage in preventive wars if they believe they can capitalize on their technological superiority before others catch up. Japan invested in naval and air power, enhancing its ability to project force rapidly and over long distances, which was crucial in its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. In conclusion, from the realist perspective, Japan's entry into World War II was a calculated attempt to maximize its security and autonomy in the face of an unfavorable power distribution and the existential uncertainties of an anarchic international system. Its actions were driven by the need to secure resources and strategic advantages to ensure its survival against perceived and potential threats, reflecting the core principles of realist thought. The second theory is called institutionalism. Through the lens of institutionalism, Japan's entry into World War II can be seen not as an isolated act of aggression but as part of a broader negotiation process among states, where the ultimate goal of war is to achieve specific objectives, not just to engage in conflict for its own sake. The objectives in Japan's case included territorial expansion, acquisition of resources and securing strategic and economic benefits. Institutionalism would argue that states resort to war because they believe it to be the only way to achieve these goals when negotiations fail or are not deemed possible. Institutionalists believe that since war is costly, there should theoretically always be a preferable negotiation outcome that all sides would choose over conflict. War is seen as ex post inefficient because, if the outcomes were known beforehand, a better deal could be struck in advance that would improve the position of all involved. The onset of war, from this viewpoint, could be attributed to, firstly, asymmetric information and misjudgments about the opponent's resolve, capabilities, or the value they place on certain objectives. Japan might have miscalculated the willingness of Western powers to concede to its demands or the cost of a potential conflict. Second, the inability to make credible commitments can lead to war. Japan's expansionist policies and its refusal to withdraw from conquered territories made it difficult for Western powers to trust any Japanese commitments to peace. And the third reason, the indivisibility of the contestants' items or areas. For example, Japan's invasion of territories like Manchuria was not something that could be easily divided or shared, and thus negotiations were less likely to succeed. International institutions can help prevent wars by increasing interdependence, reducing information asymmetries, and acting as mediators. For Japan, the lack of strong international institutions meant that the mechanisms for peaceful resolution were weak or non-existent. The concept of interdependence suggests that the opportunity costs of war rise with increased economic connectivity. Institutionalism would highlight the fact that modern Japan, so post-World War II, is a prime example of how free trade can be an alternative to conquest. However, as World War I showed with the high economic interdependence between Germany and the UK, interdependence does not always prevent war. Similarly, Japan in the 1930s, despite its trade relations, still pursued a path of conquest. In sum, institutionalism would interpret Japan's entry into World War II as a failure of international negotiation and the inability to find a peaceful settlement that would have been preferable and less costly than the resulting conflict. It underscores the importance of international institutions and mechanisms that could have provided alternatives to war, facilitated negotiations, reduced uncertainties, and perhaps helped to avoid the immense costs of World War II. The third theory is called the liberal theory. Viewed through the lens of liberal theory, Japan's entry into World War II can be analyzed as a series of interactions among various political and economic interests, both domestic and international, which contributed to the escalation of conflict. Liberal theorists might argue that in Japan, a strong military-industrial complex had developed, with significant lobbying power and influence over national policy. This complex stood to gain from military expansion through increased production and government contracts. This benefits the military and industries associated with defense, but the costs are distributed across the state, particularly to the civilian population who may face the brunt of war's hardships and the economic burden of financing the conflict. Yet, according to liberal theorists like Bruce Racet and the philosophical ideals of Kant in Perpetual Peace and Thomas Paine in Rights of Man, peace is achievable through democratic structures. These structures purportedly spread the costs of war more evenly across society, making the population less inclined to support war, since they bear its costs directly. Additionally, democratic governments are accountable to their citizens, who are generally believed to prefer peace to war. Liberal theory suggests that democratic states are less likely to engage in conflict with one another due to shared norms and structures for peaceful conflict resolution, a phenomenon often referred to as democratic peace theory. Studies, such as those by Imai and Lowe, have found strong statistical correlations supporting this theory, indicating that democratic pairs of states tend to be more peaceful in their relations compared to other pairs of states. In explaining democratic peace, liberal theory posits several factors. Democracies are better at signaling peaceful intentions or credible deterrence, reducing the chances of misunderstandings that could lead to war. Second, compatible conflict resolution structures exist within democratic systems, which allow for peaceful negotiation and compromise. The third reason, there's a political imperative for democratic leaders to win wars to maintain public support and legitimacy, making them more cautious about entering conflicts they are not confident they can win decisively. And the last reason might be norms and ideas within democratic societies, such as the rule of law and the value of individual life, promote peaceful interactions over warlike behavior. Applying these liberal concepts to Japan's entry into World War II, one could argue that Japan, not being a democratic state at the time, was less constrained by public opinion and more influenced by the military industrial interests that benefited from conflict. Japan's actions also reflected a lack of democratic peace norms that might have facilitated more peaceful relations with its neighbors and the Western powers. If Japan had possessed more democratic structures, the liberal argument would suggest that it might have pursued more peaceful avenues in response to its international trade frustrations and ambitions for regional influence. The last theory I'm going to talk about is called constructivism. Through the lens of constructivism, Japan's entry into World War II can be interpreted as being driven by ideational factors rather than just material interests or anarchy in the international system. Constructivism posits that the identities, norms, and values of states shape their perceptions of interests and thus influence their foreign policies and decisions, including the choice to go to war. For Japan, the decision to enter the war could be seen as adherence to a set of norms that prescribe the defense and spread of certain values and national identity, including notions of empire, regional dominance, and a reaction against Western imperialism. Constructivism would also point to the narrative within Japan that presented the country as a liberator of Asia from Western colonial powers, which constructed a normative framework for its actions. Samuel Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations might be invoked to argue that Japan saw itself in a civilizational context with Western powers, which it perceived as a threat to its values and way of life. Huntington posits that cultural and civilizational differences are primary sources of conflict. This perspective could be applied to Japan's view of the Western powers' influence in Asia as a civilizational encroachment that needed to be resisted and countered through war. However, the critique of Huntington's thesis suggests caution in oversimplifying the homogeneity of cultures. It brings forth the idea, as articulated by Amartya Sen, that individuals and states have multiple identities, such as profession, ethnicity, political beliefs, and nationality, ethnicity. These identities are fluid and overlapping, and most conflicts occur within civilizations, not just between them. Moreover, constructivism considers the role of security communities, as described by Karl Deutsch and colleagues. These are groups of states that have developed a sense of community and mutual identity through dense interactions and communication, which significantly reduces the likelihood of conflict. For Japan, pre-World War II, this sense of community was not established with Western powers or its Asian neighbors, leading to a perception of existential threat and a drive to establish its own regional order. Thus, in the constructivist view, Japan's actions leading up to and during the early stages of World War II were as much about asserting its identity and norms as about seeking material gains. It saw itself as an ascending power deserving of regional primacy and acted in ways that were consistent with this self image and the narratives it constructed about its place in the world.